What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the BFR Better for Results podcast. I'm here with Teddy Wilsey. Is that it? Wilsey? Yeah, Wilsey? Pretty good. From Healthy Baller. He's on my casting couch today. So,
I requested black leather, but
yeah, we couldn't do black leather. So, it is what it is. But we're here for an abbreviated episode at CSM, Combined Sections Meeting. That's the largest physical therapy convention in the United States, maybe in the world. I actually don't know. But nonetheless, we're going to pop in here, have a quick convo, and talk just about, what he's doing at Healthy Baller, what we're going to probably bitch and complain about the rehab scene and the crazy things that we've seen at CSM already in the exhibit hall. But nonetheless, hey, welcome. So if just fill the viewers in about who you are, what drives you, and we can kind of go from there.
yeah, absolutely. So I started Healthy Baller PT about 8.5 years ago with the goal of just kind of bringing my sports performance background to physical therapy. So that's what we do, from a test and measure standpoint, from a training and building capacity standpoint, and just from trying to meet athletes kind of where they are and give people, and not just like young athletes, we try to see recreational athletes and adults too, but just give people a better opportunity to rehab and get back to an active life compared to maybe some of the other clinical environments. Trying to not throw people under the bus here, but
Yeah, well, no, I can. So the traditional physical therapy models, where you see somebody for like 10 minutes and then you get handed off to an aide that probably learned an exercise 5 seconds before he or she is actually working with you and then is supposed to understand exactly what you're supposed to do. And how do I know that? Because I was one of those people before I became a physical therapist. So I'm pretty familiar with that model.
it's kind of a bizarre system if you have to funnel what you're doing through somebody else that maybe you just met yesterday.
Yeah.
Because the tech position in most PT practices is not something that people are keeping for years or staying there for years. It's a revolving.
It's a churning physician
experience. Yeah.
Oh, I know. I think it's actually like we could probably make that statement pretty effectively in the sense of a lot of people that are PT techs are coming for meeting hours for PT school.
Mhm.
So they're somewhat knowledgeable, but again, they're not to the level of a physical therapist. And this kind of gets me on the my soapbox about people saying that physical therapy is not effective. Well, no shit. If you're seeing somebody for the majority of your time that's not a trained professional,
Right.
and that's kind of the model, right? That people go to. So your model is what? Like, talk to me about
1 hour one-on-one. Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's there are a lot of other jobs that are massage therapists, personal trainers, and so we were like, well, we just take that to physical therapy. Just charge people for their time, and then we can offer them out-of-network reimbursement paperwork and that sort of thing as well, and work with their assurances when asked to.
And so, how many staff do you have?
There's 9 of us, including myself. Wow. Yeah. So that's awesome. 3 locations and opening a 4th this spring, early summer. So
Congrats, man! I think that's awesome.
yeah, no, it's been a fun ride, and when you build this kind of practice and this approach, and it is that 1 hour one-on-one, you're still funneling your work through other people, but it's other skilled physical therapists, and you're only as strong as kind of like your weakest link. So we focus a lot on mentoring and hiring people that are highly motivated and just trying to have a high quality staff, because that is the product that we're offering. So we've been fortunate to bring on some people that were students with us. We've been fortunate to have a lot of, like I said, motivated, hardworking people that, my team's great. That's
awesome.
That's the only way we do it.
That's awesome. So, since we're time limited, I want to just go rapid fire questions to you. First and foremost, like, what is your biggest pet peeve in the rehab or strength training, strength and conditioning, like narrative community, whatever?
Yeah, I think my biggest pet peeve is not using any sort of actual objective measure to make your decisions. I don't understand how in this day and age people aren't doing some sort of objective testing for ACL return to sport. I don't understand how people aren't consistently loading and building capacity if that's what their goal is. And it just all comes back to kind of the strength side of it, and that's my bias. Right? But it's so many people come to us with active goals, and we provide them with these passive modalities and treatments that don't really empower them and build their locus of self-control and help them to actually really get back and do what they want to do.
So what would an objective assessment look like in a typical evaluation where you would then say, this physical therapist, or I mean, again, in your model, but like this physical therapist knows what he or she is doing.
It's an interesting question because let's say you got a runner with knee pain that's in their 40s. We don't need to put them on a dynamometer day one. For them, it might just be strategies to help them kind of work through or around their knee pain. But there's still going to be objectives assigned to it in the sense that we're not going to just say, okay, start running again. We're going to approach their running volume the same way you might for a strength and conditioning or a training plan, And so objective numbers don't always have to be strength testing. It doesn't always have to be meathead stuff, but it's creating some sort of like purposeful and meaningful approach to volume and to making change.
So what about, okay, I'm on board with that because I think one of the biggest conversations that I have with every one of my clients is workload management and making sure that we're looking at something like an insidious onset of knee pain and basically saying, this is not potentially due to biomechanics. What are you doing? What does your last month and a half look like in terms of your training volume? And I think that is a low hanging fruit that, in my experience, just talking with other physical therapists, but also talking with a lot of my patients that have been to physical therapy, they don't really talk about that stuff.
Right.
And I think that's such a thing. We're very quick to, talk about what is evidence-based and, objective measures.
Let's just see them do one set of a few single leg squats and then be like, oh, there's valgus here.
And like, and was it, and that's another thing too, like that valgus, for example, like there was a recent biomechanics paper that actually was saying that valgus can actually put the hip abductors in a better position to generate torque. So it actually might be beneficial to the movement pattern. And yet we're bastardizing it without any context. And so I mean,
that's kind of one of the theories behind the valgus that we see with a squat or a jump is to lengthen the hip abductor so that they can then be utilized or recruited to a greater extent.
Yeah. And I think that's great in terms of like talking about volume and whatever. It's not necessarily an objective test, right? But it's something that's valuable. Okay.
And so that's why I kind of like expanded on like not just the testing side of it, but we're applying some sort of intentional approach to variables, and we're trying to somehow identify variables that we can manipulate or tweak rather than this dichotomous, okay, you're ready to go run again. Okay, stop running. I mean, sometimes runners look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm like, if you're not running right now, you should be walking. Like, why would I go walking? I'm like, if you walking, if you haven't done a 45-minute walk, but you want to get back to 45 minutes of running, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
And then just dose in a little bit of running. And
so when would you use, okay, so you mentioned, so we talk about the generalized athlete. I'm going to call them an athlete because people that are running, they're doing athletic activities. So when would you use that dynamometer? When would you use some other, what we would consider purely objective testing?
So if I need to reduce something down to a specific joint, if I want to get to that level of reductionism, it's going to be because I think that there's some sort of major issue with load capacity at that joint or as their ability to produce torque force at that joint. So it might be from a soft tissue injury where we know that muscle's ability to produce force is going to be affected. It might be from a surgery where we know that joint's ability to produce force is going to be, affected. So it's usually when there's some sort of injury process that we know that there's going to be a decrease in force output, and we want to improve that over time. Understanding also that force output and strength is a measure of more than just the muscle itself. It's a measure of your body's protective mechanism. It's a measure of inhibition. So there's going to be a lot of other factors that we're measuring with that. But it's interesting then. Great women post posed like a question on Instagram like a month ago or so about the need for dynamometry testing with everything. And so he likes to like just challenge ideas, which I love. And, you know,
He does it in, by the way, a respectful way.
oh, absolutely. And I'm somebody that I actually probably did a little bit more dynamometry testing 8 years ago than I'm doing right
Mhm.
now. Because like I said, maybe for that recreational athlete, we don't need to measure their torque right away, you know? So it's just going to be, it's also a process of facilitating buy-in. I mean, we know that testing helps our patients to understand what we're looking at and thinking about, and it gives them something that they can track and kind of say, okay, now we're improving here. So there are other advantages to testing besides just the measuring of it for our reductionism purposes.
No. I think I agree. I think that there's this trend that, we have to be as objective as humanly possible in all circumstances. And I think we can take the notion, or we can derive some of the thought process behind the fact that, like not everything it has to be completely correlated all of the time. I think having a framework that's systematic in your ability to approach something and filtering out when things are potentially needed in certain areas and going that way.
Mhm.
Okay, fine, we're good, we're on board. What for you is something in rehab that excites you at this current point?
Hmm. I'm excited. I would say that that's a good question. I would say that I'm excited by the progress that I see in general. So I mentioned that a pet peeve would be not using enough of this objective approach. And I think that there's a lot more of it than there were 10 years ago. I mean, we got force plates at HB in 2017, I believe. And at the time, I don't think I was aware of one other clinic that had force plates. You look 8 years later, there are tons of physical therapy clinics that have force plates out there. Now, force plates aren't the answer to everything, and there's actually a lot of issues with when you start to try to measure isometrics and look at RFD. I mean, there's going to be a lot of issues with that noisy variable and blah blah blah. But I'm excited by the progress that has been made in physical therapy to adopt some of the what you might traditionally call like strength and conditioning tools, strength and conditioning principles.
So what about the opposite question that besides the model, right? Because I think we can agree that's probably the biggest thing. Besides that, what doesn't excite you about the industry right now?
the 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 general direction of social media and how there are so many people that you might glance at their profile and think they actually know what they're doing, but they don't. They haven't had the experience and the time. And there's just a lot of bad information out there as well. And I mean, that's kind of a reflection or something that you see across a lot of industries and facets right now. It's certainly not just physical therapy, but I didn't post online until I was like 30, 31 years old. I mean, I did like a guest blog for like Brett Contreras in my 20s. Like I did some, but like, it was like, I wasn't out there trying to purport that I knew everything. I still don't, but I wasn't trying to be a leader and a teacher in this industry until I had 10 years of experience in the industry.
I think you're in the minority. Yeah, I definitely.
It's also just my age.
Yeah, I mean, I started posting on BFR stuff just to keep myself accountable and open myself up to alternative thought processes. And I think that where social media is at right now, that I actually that wasn't even on my radar, but that actually is. I probably agree is the biggest issue is this lack of ability to truly like be a nuanced professional online, because nothing works these days unless you're controversial. None of my education posts really ever hit. None of, unless I'm making a statement that's inflammatory, but it's inflammatory by design that causes some sort of reaction. But that's not who I am as
But you're getting wrong.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like don't do these 5 things if
Right.
you want knee pain. I was like, no shit, nobody wants knee pain. Like, and we can't even. And honestly, like the amount of times that I've seen somebody like with knee pain, where we've then circling back to our initial part of the conversation, where I'm like, I look at them and we like do some stuff, and it's like, you know what? I honestly just think that this is a workload problem. Like you've just done too much in this period of time, or you've done too little, and now all of a sudden you're doing a reasonable amount of stuff, but your tissues haven't had the capacity to adapt. So why am I going to pathologize
Yeah.
something that is just a training error?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's just a level of people doing their own research, even from our patients. I mean, if I get one more parent that suggests to me to take a look at knees over toes guy, I'm gonna gouge my eyes.
Oh no.
I'm gonna gouge my damn eyes.
Oh.
But and in the armchair experts, yeah, in the idea of just loading it, there are a lot more younger and we take students. I mean, we have multiple students every year at HV, and I think it's a really important part of being able to give back now that we have a little bit bigger clinic and capacity to do so. But these students come in and they are so much more motivated to try to load people, but they don't appreciate or understand the nuance of how to find entry points.
Boom.
And they're oftentimes overloading people, and they haven't really trained themselves enough to even appreciate how to do these things. And that's my own bias too, that I'm always trying to work through, because I personally have learned so much of this through my own, it all started with me with my own passion for training. And I understand that you don't have to be a total meathead to be a good, or a total high performing athlete to be a good clinician, but you gotta feel things out. You gotta understand how to cue foot position and how that impacts things going on in the hip and the groin. And I mean, it just,
Dude, you hit on, so basically that was my next question, which is the new grads that are coming out here that are saying that they're evidence-based by just loading their patients.
Right.
And so anybody who and I'll admit, like I was definitely, when I first started seeing patients, this is now 8 years ago, that I definitely was, oh, you just strength train. Just strength train. Like we can find entry points in strength training and get our patients better. But the more that I practice, the more I recognize that that's not always possible. Like I am totally fine, because at the end of the day, we are a consumer business. People are coming to us in pain. Yes, we are medical providers, but we are ultimately giving our clients and patients an experience. An experience, sometimes we might have to deviate from purely strength training, and maybe we do a little manual, or we're doing a little of other things that might inform our practice, that aren't necessarily by the books evidence-based. So what are your thoughts on that, as somebody who's had a lot of experience in the field?
so if somebody has a hamstring strain, you don't just do 7 different hamstring exercises. You still approach people. And if you're going to be a strength training forward physical therapist, you still need to understand, and you are not grandfathered into being a strength coach because you're a PT. You still need to understand how to put together a really good program for people, because that is what you're not going to fill the whole hour with hamstring stuff. You need to be able to do other exercises. You need to understand, if it's a high hamstring injury, you need to understand, okay, what are the knee dominant movements that we're going to do here? Are we going to limit hip flexion? Are we going to try to maybe, impact like shin angle? Like let's say like a sliding reverse lunge with like a vertical shin, they're going to have to pull themselves forward with their hamstring. That's a great choice if you're trying to load the hamstring in a knee dominant type of pattern. Like you still need to understand how to put together a big program, or just a good program, and then pick and choose your spots for the hamstring rehabilitation. It's not just, oh, let me pull up a Instagram post on hamstring exercises and do the first 7 that I see.
There. That's the difference. So Teddy's hammering on a point that I try to make when I'm having discussions with potential clients for personal training, right? Because a lot of my clients, they have orthopedic issues and they don't necessarily trust a personal trainer. And so the question I get is like, all right, so what do what's different? And it really is, it's understanding relationships between joints and how that places stress on particular regions, and using that knowledge to form an exercise program.
Mhm.
I think that is like so it's not just streamed together. Like, so when people come in and they say, oh, there's a full, like, I'm a big proponent of full body exercise for my personal training clients and just in general,
Mhm.
just because again, a lot of people just need to get in, do a moderate amount of volume and get out. But when you have orthopedic injuries, then it's like, all right, you have to accommodate. But I can still get them on a full body program
Yeah.
and drive that muscular adaptation and strength adaptation, and depending on the cardiovascular capacity, cardiovascular adaptation, by applying my knowledge as a physical therapist, but to an exercise program. And that is why we as physical therapists are so valuable in a personal training capacity.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the physical therapists are afraid to venture into the realm of training because, as you correctly, and I say correctly just because that fits my bias as well, like, don't have a lot of experience training themselves.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, how can I, not do that? And I think that's misguided.
And just understanding a training program for the person that's in front of you. If you're working with somebody that needs to hit max velocity as a field athlete or close to it, like a soccer player, and they're not going to be able to sprint because they've had that hamstring injury, let's train their hip flexors.
Mhm.
Because their hip flexors are going to be completely, they're going to be blown up when they start to sprint again.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that they continue to have the ability to get into the positions and the shapes that they need to be able to sprint. Like let's just make sure that, and I kind of tend to approach this from a very organized, dichotomized way of categorizing exercises by you're either working through the injury or working around the injury.
I like
And you need to do both. So you're working with an ACL, a heavy sled push. You could do that pretty early on in that rehab process. That's working around the injury. That's not working through it. A single leg splot, that's working through the injury for an ACL. So it's like you got to, and you need to have that training effect for the working around the injury stuff for athletes in order to give them an opportunity to continue to develop athletically.
So I know we're running on time,
Yeah.
but I would be remiss to not ask you, how are you using blood flow restriction? Are you using blood flow restriction? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on BFR, and where have you found the most success with implementing BFR?
The analgesic effect of BFR is just so powerful, and it's more difficult for us to actually measure some of the hypertrophic responses that you get from BFR and how that might inform power production later on in the process. But we use BFR every single day, and we see tons of ACLs, as anybody that's familiar with HB probably knows. And we just strap them on, and it's just a big part of our process for every single one of our post-surgical knee patients. And
When are you doing BFR?
that's usually towards the beginning of the session, and we're doing either
How far post op?
from very early on. Like we're using it with E-stem when we're just trying to get terminal extension in those early days on the table. We're using it with like a total gym or like a sled squat or like leg press, like single leg. Obviously low load, high repetition, 30, 3 by 15. We're using it with leg extension quite often as well, or knee extension. So it's a very powerful tool that we have adopted, and we use it, like I said, every single day.
Have you noticed that you're getting more referrals for blood flow restriction as part of the rehab, or like it's more just like you have free reign and you've been implementing it more because you've been seeing more of the benefits to the rehab?
We're not getting referrals in the traditional sense where like somebody's telling us to use it. But I think at this point, at least the physicians that do refer to us, because most of the physicians that refer to us have a practice in their basement and they're still referring to us because they understand that we're doing a little bit different rehab job than maybe their physician-owned practice. I think those physicians are hip to BFR, or they are as hip as a physician can be to exercise approaches.
And then the last question,
Yeah.
as a clinician, where would you like to see some of the BFR literature evolving to in the future? What are the questions that you have about BFR that you hope in the next decade there'll be at least some answers to?
You know, I am not as up on the BFR literature as I am on some other topics. And so I don't want to pose something that might already be there, but I will say that something that I've always been curious about is where do you reach the point of diminishing returns and you decide that a BFR approach is eventually becomes inferior potentially to a just a little bit higher load.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And or is the decreased stress on the body in some ways because of the load, there's decreased, arthrokinematic stress because of the load, but maybe there's still increased metabolic stress, physiologic stress on the muscle. Does that still create an environment where BFR will always have a potentially beneficial effect, if that makes sense?
Oh, no. Yeah, I think those are great questions to have. Hopefully the research will elucidate some of those. So we're wrapping up. Anything else you want to let people know about? Shout out your Instagram handles. What anything else? Just
Strength Coach Therapy at Strength Coach Therapy on Instagram.
all right. That's it.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for watching this rapid fire CSM Casting Couch edition podcast. We'll tune in. I'll see you guys later.
Thanks.
Bye. And that was today's episode of the BFR Better for Results podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, I would love if you subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. I really appreciate the support.